Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast, live on our Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter channels, and later on our podcast channel. If you're watching live on YouTube, please remember to like and subscribe. And if you're listening on our podcast channel, hit like and follow and leave us a rating and review as well. We really do appreciate it. I'm Andrew Musgrove, joined as usual by Aaron Stokes, but Aaron's not in the office because, bless him, he's had one away trip and it tired him out, so he's back at home. But we're going to go over this. What is a valuable point, I think, Aaron, a good point. How are you feeling after your trip down to Old Trafford?
Yeah, it was a good point, I think, on the balance of the game. I think quite an even game. First half, Newcastle were probably the more dominant team. I thought second half they really let Manchester United back into the game. I thought there was a lot of tired bodies out there. I think, the team looked like, they look like they're the team that played twice since Newcastle had last played. Really, they really didn't look as fit as Man United in the second half. But I think on the balance of the game, I think the point is probably a fair result. And I think, look, Newcastle United are proven very, very hard to beat. You look at the table, they've only conceded 9 goals. They've obviously only lost one game, and that was to Liverpool in very contentious circumstances. So there's a lot of positives to take, even though, the game wasn't as good as we've seen from Newcastle in recent weeks.
I mean, really, going into the interval, they should have been at least a goal up. Joe Linton had a good couple of chances, hit the woodwork. Newcastle went into that game, as we expected, not showing any fear, and they showed just why other teams around them are probably starting to wake up a little bit and realise that Newcastle aren't just here to make up the numbers.
100%, and I think in years gone by, even under Benitez, we would have seen Newcastle go to Old Trafford and just sit back and try and soak up a lot of pressure and hit them on the counter attack. Whereas under Eddie Howe, that just is not the case. From minute one, they were pressing from the front. Longstaff, Joe Linton, really trying to make sure that any time Man United midfielders had the ball, they were all over them. Wilson, Murphy, and Miggy really, really putting pressure on the defenders whenever they were playing out from the back. So that first half was really positive. I think Newcastle should have went in ahead at the break. They only really conceded one major chance of note at the other end when Pope made a good save from Anthony. So from that aspect, it was disappointing. We saw Joe Linton hit the woodwork twice in 30 seconds. That was a really key moment. Wilson went close with a header. And obviously the penalty claim, which we'll talk about later on. But I think this is where we talk about Newcastle being ruthless, and I think we've seen it in other games, not so much in the last 2 weeks where they've won, but the games against Palace and Bournemouth and yesterday are the games where they're really crying out for just a little bit more in the final third.
And Kieran Trippier said that after the game, didn't he? That when you go to places like Old Trafford, you're not going to get many chances. So the chances you do get, you need to put them in the back of the net. And you mentioned there, Aaron, the fact that Newcastle, aren't sitting back. They are going for points in these games against the big sides, because this season, when the big sides have been the opposition, we have wondered whether, Newcastle, for instance, we spoke about it before the Man City game, might go to 5 at the back, but we're not seeing anyhow change his formation. What we're seeing is him sticking to his beliefs, sticking to his guns. And I guess what jumps out for me is that's kind of the best way you're going to find out what Newcastle or where Newcastle need to improve to get to that next level. Because if you're always changing and chopping to suit the team that's visiting, you're never really going to see where you need to bring in players to improve to fit your system.
Yeah, definitely. Look, how is sticking to that principle. He believes in the formation that he chose, and he doesn't believe that he needs to put 5 at the back to try and, as I mentioned earlier, try and soak up the game and make them more defensively resolute. I thought yesterday was probably one of the best defensive performances of the season. Fabian Schar and Botman are performing a fantastic partnership at the back. And as I say, in the first half, they didn't really give too many chances away. And in the second half, they maybe got lucky towards the end. But I thought on the whole, it was a good defensive performance. And I think, we've seen it in the last 2 weeks where Eddie Howe didn't want to make many changes after the 2 wins. He doesn't make wholesale changes. And even yesterday, when I asked him after the game about the tired bodies and if he could make changes the next couple of games, he sort of said, well, I might want to, but it doesn't look like he has the options to at the minute. So he's trying to get, a bit like Ten Hag is trying to do at Man United, he's trying to get that, core group of 11, 12 players who he can trust every week to go out there. And he doesn't look like he's got too many options off the bench given how many injuries they've had.
The defensive display was brilliant, and yes, at the end it maybe was a bit backs against the wall, and you were just waiting for that final whistle to sound. But again, you look back to a year ago, and that backs against the wall was the approach for the whole game. I mean, 2 years ago, Newcastle were beaten, I think it was 4-1 by Manchester United, St James's Park, the heaviest defeat in 6 years at the time. 2 years later, they're leaving Old Trafford thinking, well, maybe we could have got 3 points. And there's a key difference then on the defensive side. It really is that, putting bodies on the line, that's no longer the first thought when it comes to being defensive. The first thought is actually, let's try and dominate these attacking players that we've got to keep quiet, as opposed to just everyone to the ball or everyone to the star man, and let's just hope it ricochets off one of us and goes over the bar.
Yeah, 100%. I think, look, in years gone by, if you'd said that a Newcastle United defence was going up against Ronaldo, Sancho, Anthony, big money players, there'd be that fear and trepidation there. But yesterday, Sancho didn't have too good of a game. I thought he was good in fits and spells. Fair play to Anthony. He did have Dan Burn on toast 3 or 4 times, and Dan Burn was really sort of exposed by him. But I think on the whole, as you say, it was quite a spirited and resolute performance, which we're coming to see, more and more from Newcastle United. If you look at the league table, they're the only Premier League club not to have conceded double figures this season. They've conceded less than any team in the league, and that is Eddie Howe's doing. And so many people said when he came in, well, look at his record with Bournemouth. He's very attacking minded and he can't defend, but he's proven that he's actually putting that into work at Newcastle. But yeah, look, a very good performance on the whole. I think Newcastle are showing that they can mix it with anyone in this league. They've went to the 2 Manchester clubs and Liverpool, and were really unlucky not to take points from all 3 of them.
That's the brilliant thing about it, is when we're talking about a good defensive display, it's not coming as a surprise, is it? Because we now know what Eddie Howe is doing. We're seeing it in practice, and these clean sheets that they're getting. It's I'm not going to say it's becoming something that we expect, but keeping a clean sheet isn't one of these things that is maybe celebrated as much as it once was under previous managers. You mentioned Dan Burn there. That was my one fear, was him going up against Anthony. You're right, he did was outpaced quite a few times. Look, again, we don't want to single out one individual, and I guess as well, this question is probably one that you would maybe want to ask if they didn't have so many games in the next few days. But how do you address Dan Burn's future in this starting 11?
It's a tricky one, because the last couple of weeks, I was sort of banging the drum for Dan Burn and saying, he hasn't put a foot wrong this season, and it would be harsh to drop him. I thought the first couple of games he had at left back, he was really assured. And as I say, he hadn't really done too much wrong, whereas now I think we're starting to see where his weaknesses are. Anthony yesterday, he drew a yellow card from Dan Burn, and I thought Howe was going to take him off soon after that, and he didn't, and he kept him on. And there was a couple of times where he thought he's going to be sent off here, because it just wasn't even a matchup. In terms of where his future is now in the starting lineup, I think, look, he's a brilliant option to have at centre back. We know that. I think against lesser teams, he's a good option to have at left back. But I think if it was me, I think it's time to really start looking at getting Matt Targett back in this team if he's fully fit.
Do you think, and this is just me putting it out there, do you think maybe it's quite clever from Eddie Howe to have played Dan Burn on Sunday against Manchester United, knowing everything's coming on Wednesday, and it looks initially like, if Dan Burn doesn't start on Wednesday, it's because there's so many games, so he's been rested, but then Matt Targett comes in, plays well, Matt Targett starts the next game, and so on and so on. So did you think there's a little bit of that in it, maybe?
I can't believe you're accusing Eddie Howe of mind games. He would never do something like that. No,
He's very clever though, isn't he?
He is a very, very clever man, and he's always thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. So it wouldn't surprise me. Look, I think the reason he's probably started at Man United is probably because, as I said before, Howe doesn't like to change a winning formula. They haven't, yes, they conceded against Fulham and Brentford, but they've put in some really good defensive shows recently. You highlighted it last week, more than me, that you thought Dan Burn had really struggled at Brentford, and I was sort of on the fence about it. But Sunday, he was the weak link, and I think it's probably one of the selection headaches that Howe's going to have in the next couple of weeks as to, how he sort of manages Burn in the next couple of games.
I've got no fear that Eddie Howe will make the tough calls. We've seen him make the tough calls before, and he'll make another tough call here. But I do think that if you're looking at that back four, Dan Burn is probably the weak link. People will target if he starts on Wednesday. If Damari Gray's on that side, or whoever's on that side for Everton, we'll probably look at that and think we can really push him here. And then you obviously got Spurs on Sunday. So I do think he's a bit of a weak link. He's done brilliant as he's filled in, but maybe it is time to bring Target back in. That said as well, Trippier on the other side, he was superb, I felt, against Brentford, but there was a few times against Manchester United and that I felt he was caught out, and Man United got the better of him.
I'm not too sure. I don't know. I thought Trippier had quite a good game yesterday. I think Sancho was really giving it a good go in that first half to try and get down that left-hand side. And I thought Trippier did okay. I think his leadership quality showed through. But look, he is going to have, the odd off game. He's 32 now. He's not getting any younger. We've sometimes seen it, especially at the start of the season, that he maybe doesn't have the legs for every game anymore. But I think, in terms of what he's offered so far this season, I think, he has been brilliant.
I suppose that's the key as well that you mentioned there. These players are going to have off days. Everyone raving about Bruno against Brentford, had one of his quieter games against Manchester United. Everyone raving about Schar and Botman, but they equally could have a quiet game or stinkers against Everton or Spurs. It goes back to what maybe I was saying last week, and you laughed at us when I said it, but it's just about keeping our feet on the ground. When a player has a good day, let's not expect that's going to be week in, week out.
I would never laugh at you for an opinion like that. No way. I'm trying to keep my feet on the ground as well. No, look, I do agree. Maybe everybody got ahead of themselves with Bruno after Brentford. Yesterday, I did think he was quite quiet. I didn't think he controlled the game as he usually does. I thought he was quite sloppy in possession in the first half. So look, yeah, they're all going to have off days. We saw it with Wilson, in the last couple of games where he hasn't really been firing. Bruno, every 1 in 10, has a sort of stinker. But I think as a whole, I think the group is proven quite consistent. I think, you can't go, this stage into a Premier League season only losing one game without, having some form of consistency there. So I don't think it's too much of a worry. I just think, there's a crucial period of games coming up now. They're suffering with injuries to key players. So these sort of fringe players that have been thrown in, the likes of Longstaff, the likes of Burn at left back, do really need to sort of step it up as well.
You mentioned earlier in the show about those core group of players. Just talk to us then, who's in that core group as you see it, and how many will feature, do you think, over the next couple of games?
Look, I think, there's players that are emerging now as real, must-haves on this team sheet. And, obviously the obvious ones are Pope and Bruno and Trippier. I think Almiron the last couple of games, you can't fault him. I think even yesterday, even though it was a quieter game second half, I thought first half he was trying to make things happen. Joelinton, since he's came back from injury, has proven that, he is capable of playing midfield week in, week out. I think he's been very impressive. So I think how knows this. He's got a senior group now of maybe 5 or 6 that are really sort of, game changers in this team, both going forward and at the back. And I think, although I initially had doubts about whether it should be Botman and Schar at the back earlier this season, I was really, really impressed with Dan Burn in the first 5 games. I think what we saw yesterday, there's no doubt in my mind now that Schar and Botman is ultimately, it's got to be the number 1 pairing going forward. I think Fabian Schar yesterday had arguably his best game in a Newcastle shirt for a long, long time. I thought he was absolutely superb in every aspect. And Botman has just proven to be this sensational find. And everyone talks about the price tag for Bruno being a snip at 30 odd million. I think, bringing Botman in for 30 million is going to prove some immense business in the next couple of years.
I've got some stats here about Schar and Botman, and between them, they attempted 75 passes, 65 were accurate, which is a fantastic amount. Schar made 7 clearances, 3 interceptions. Botman made 3 clearances. Between them, they won 5 out of their 7 duels. I mean, really, really top class performance. And you saw as well the one kind of moment that Manchester United got the better of them, and where they probably should have scored, was that Rashford effort when the ball came in very late on, and somehow Rashford put it behind. That's the sort of look you probably need as well to go with those top class performances.
Yeah, look, I think there's no doubt in it. Newcastle really did survive that scare. I think you look at the Fred chance and then the Rashford miss. They were lucky to get a point given how the last 10 minutes unplayed. But the defensive performance of those 2 centre-halves yesterday, I thought, up until the last 10 minutes, were really superb. And I think when Schar went off with a couple of minutes to go, you really saw that they were struggling. I think, you made a very good point about him earlier this season about how, he gives away sloppy fouls sometimes. He's a bit predictable when he loses the ball. But when he's good, he's really, really good. And I think more often than not this season, we're seeing that sort of form that he showed under Benitez, where he was just head and shoulders above every other defender. I think Howe is really, really getting the best out of him. And I think he's found a really, really accommodating partner in Botman to play alongside him.
It's consistency, isn't it? Again, we need to see it on a consistent basis. And to be fair, you look around, and you would probably say Schar is probably the second or third most consistent performer this season. So long may that continue. Let's get on to then probably the biggest talking point from a Newcastle point of view, and that is the Callum Wilson penalty that was not awarded. Before I get Aaron's view on that, we'll hear from Eddie Howe, who spoke after the game. This is what he had to say.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially first half, I thought we had our moments. Joe's obviously hit the woodwork twice, and that's a big moment in the game. I think Callum Wilson's penalty shout, I think, is a very strong one. We've had other moments and chances today where the last couple of weeks we've been better with the ball around the box. We weren't quite there today, but even so, very proud of the players, very proud of what they've given the game, and really pleased with the result and the defensive performance.
So there we have Eddie Howe. He thinks the call for a penalty was a strong one. Aaron, give us first of all your initial view on that incident in real time, and then we'll talk about whether VAR looked at it and whether it should have been a penalty after looking at the replays.
I think in real time, it was up our end at Old Trafford, and I think in real time, Wilson goes down. Wilson doesn't really appeal for it. Miggy's very close to it. He doesn't appeal for it. There's very little appeals from Newcastle players. And you're sort of thinking, well, had he taken a touch too big? Has he sort of drawn the foul and made a meal of it? And then, you see the replay 2 minutes later and you think, actually, why?
Does the fact that he hasn't made a meal of it, does that play a part, you think?
Personally, I think it does. Now, look, I think we're going to touch on the Ronaldo incident later, but look at what happened when Ronaldo scores that disallowed goal. 9 Manchester United players surround the referee. Now, like it or loathe it, that behaviour, some inexperienced referees will be sworn by that. And there was just not. It was as if Newcastle players didn't believe it was a penalty. Even Wilson himself sort of looked and had a half glance and then just got up and carried on. And I think, look, I'm not saying it would have swayed the referee's decision, but my initial thought was maybe it wasn't a foul because there was a very, very muted response from the players. As soon as you see the replay of it, you think, hang on a second, VAR, I've got to have a look at this. And they made that decision very, very quickly to say that it wasn't worth, a second glance from the referee.
Is that part of a wider issue then for Newcastle United? We're getting a little bit away here from the penalty, that they need to have that a bit of a nasty streak about them. Is there a bit maybe a fear on their side that they go to these big places, and although they're performing well and there is confidence, there's something missing slightly where they think they can get these decisions at these big places?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've literally just finished writing a piece about it. So it'll be online later for everybody to read. But I do think Newcastle do need to show this ruthless streak now. I'm not saying that they need to have 9 players around the referee arguing every decision as Man United were doing yesterday, but they've got to get this nasty streak if they want to stay in the top 6. You look at Liverpool, you look at Manchester City, and the way some of their players react to decisions. I think, Newcastle yesterday were a bit too meek. And maybe it was the occasion, maybe that, they're still not at the stage yet where they feel that they're, on that same level as Man United, even though yesterday I think at times they were better. And look, and we are getting away from the point, and that was that in my eyes, it was a penalty. But I just think that, Newcastle do need to be a bit more, ruthless in certain areas as they begin to sort of match these teams on the pitch.
Yeah, because it's not just about performing well on the pitch or what you do in the transfer window. It's all the little things, isn't it? That bringing in maybe a nutritionist in the dressing room to make sure the players are eating the right thing, and it's all these little things, and that includes maybe just speaking up and being a little bit more vocal when things like this happen. But we've got plenty of people in the comments here. Steve Hinton saying was a clear penalty, and although he shouldn't have to, but he maybe should have made more of a fuss. And if you've got any thoughts on anything that happened against Manchester United, do get into the comments and we'll get through the best of them. When I look at that penalty that was not given, it absolutely, it does. It blows my mind. What is the video assistant referee watching? And I mean, I saw it for the first time on Match of the Day last night. So I was watching it, hours after it actually happened. And I kept my counsel until I'd seen it. And then, straight away, you just think, what on earth has gone on? We've had pundits saying it's a Stonewall penalty. Last night, I think it was Danny Murphy, wasn't it, on Match of the Day? Danny Mills today on Sky Sports. And it's not just a Newcastle United thing. There was the incident in the West Ham game, Souček. David Moyes rightly fuming that a penalty wasn't given after Souček is wrestled to the floor. And in this game as well, as much as some people might not want to admit it, Sancho probably should have had a penalty as well. And there's a wider issue here. And we've talked about it as well earlier in the season when things were going against Newcastle with VAR. What is the point of it? What is the point of it? And let me just point out for those who haven't seen it on Sky this morning, Sky Sports, Dermot Gallagher on there. He's looking at all the big calls over the weekend and he's been asked about them. And on this Wilson one, he is asked by Danny Mills, do you think it's a foul? And he says, I do think it's a foul, but it's an on-field penalty.
What does that even mean?
So he is saying that there's a tolerance when it comes to VAR. And basically, it has to be that the referee has made a clear and obvious mistake. Just think about that concept. And I don't want to slay him because obviously he's a referee. He's refereed the professional game. I mean, and Danny Mills couldn't quite believe it either. But what does that even mean? It's an on-field foul. It's an on-field penalty. So it's a foul. It's an on-field foul, but it's not a VAR. Honestly, I can't get my head around it. And it just sums up the absolute chaos of VAR when when someone like him is saying, yes, it's a foul, but it's only an on-field foul. What message does that send out? No wonder we're sitting here pulling our hair out about VAR when that is the message coming from a former professional referee.
It is beggars belief, and I think England are the only country that seem to be getting VAR wrong. I think if you look at it across Europe, the technology is working pretty much flawlessly, whereas we've got this every week now, and a lot of the times this season it's been Newcastle that have been on the receiving end of it. But every week now you've got a contentious decision that VAR is actually getting wrong themselves, never mind the referee. So it's baffling to think that they looked at that yesterday, VAR at Stockley Park, and didn't think that it was even worth Pawson going over to the monitor to give it a second look, because I think a second look from a different angle, I think that's given a penalty 9 times out of 10.
Sancho, do you think Longstaff was fortunate not to be done for that?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think I do. And look, we can moan about Wilson's penalty, but I think 9 times out of 10, I think that Sancho one on Longstaff gets given. I think in real time we looked at it and thought, he's probably got away with one there. The replays make it look even worse. And I think, we're complaining about VAR. I think Manchester United fans were more disgruntled with Pawson's performance yesterday than we were. I think he missed two big calls there.
Honestly, I mean, people will remember my rant earlier in the season about VAR. They just need to get it right. It can't be that difficult. And Martin Keown said something interesting on Match of the Day because, of course, there was more, there was other decisions that didn't go the way they should have done. He was absolutely fuming about the idea of not having professional or ex-professional footballers in the room, because that would, I think, go some way to solving the issue. Because I think what you need people who have played the game to be able to make these calls, because quite clearly having referees in the room isn't working. So let's try something different.
Yeah, there does need to be a big change, and whether that's getting, like you say, ex-pros in there. As I said earlier in the season, I think we need to be very selective as to who they are. I wouldn't like to see the likes of a Bonnell or anyone like that involved, but there does need to be some reform. And look, I feel like we're just banging our heads against the wall. We had pretty much this exact conversation a couple of weeks ago, and it always seems to be that Newcastle are sort of on the receiving end of it. So yesterday, I think that was a big opportunity missed in the first half.
L Staple in there says, we aren't asking VAR to always favour us. We just want them to get the decisions right for everybody. And that, I think, is exactly what I'm after. Look, mistakes are going to happen, aren't they? You maybe expect one or two every now and then to go wrong. People are human. But I think over this weekend, we've just seen the absolute chaotic nature of this system, and it just isn't working. And it's so frustrating from a fan's point of view to see all this money spent on this technology, the promise it's going to make things better, and yet we're still sitting here, calling it out for not working.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, people say, don't they, their defensive is, oh, well, it evens out across the season. Well, if that's the case, Newcastle are due a lot of luck in the second half of the season, given that we've had, just off the top of my head, you had John Stones on Fabian Schär, you had that Joe Willock goal disallowed, you had yesterday. It certainly does feel, and obviously, of course, there is no bias, of course, but it does just feel like Newcastle have been very, very unlucky this season with the decisions.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be discussing VAR in the not too distant future as well. And also, we have to point out that in recent weeks, VAR has gone in the favour of Newcastle, but we shouldn't be celebrating that, because it should just be doing that anyway in terms of getting the right decisions.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's hope I don't have to have another rant about VAR, because I'm absolutely sick of it.
We'll be here Thursday morning, honestly, after Everton, and there'll have been some decision go against, so I can guarantee it.
I'm sure there was some fans that were like celebrating when they couldn't have the VAR initially for the Leeds Arsenal game, thinking, yes, maybe, we'll get the decisions right. The other big talking point, I mean, there was a Ronaldo Trippier claim for a penalty. Did you think that one was a penalty? I wasn't too sure on that one. I thought the Sancho one was, but I didn't think that Ronaldo one was.
I thought that was just good defending from Trippier. I don't think that was a penalty. I think that was the correct decision from Pawson.
And the other big talking point, well, who else is it going to involve? Of course, it's going to involve Ronaldo. Was taking the ball off Nick Pope and popping it into the back of the net. Again, talk to me about your initial reaction to that when it happened.
If I'm completely honest, because Nick Pope was just about to take a free kick well inside his own half, I think a lot of us had our heads in our laptops, and all of a sudden we saw Man United have the ball in the net, and we all thought, okay, what's gone on here? I think Craig Pawson blowing the whistle so early, in terms of Cristiano Ronaldo puts the ball in the net, and I don't even think the ball's gone in the net yet, and he's already blown and said, whoa, hang on. I think, we have just criticised him there for the mistakes he made. I thought he was very, very clinical in that respect. As I've touched on earlier, you had every single Man United player apart from Schar and De Gea running over to him to try and contest that decision. But I thought he stuck to his guns well, and there was sort of no wobbling from him on that.
He's still got his hand in the air, hasn't he? So I mean, you can see Ronaldo's trying to be clever, but I'm sure in his heart of hearts he knew that it wasn't going to count. But I guess in the world of VR and the modern day football, if you see an opportunity, then why not try your luck? But you've got Man United fans kicking off, but I think the fact that the referee started his hand in the air, it was just Ronaldo trying to be a little bit cheeky, and thank goodness it wasn't counted. Just we'll go on to a few of the chances Man United did have. We've mentioned that Rashford header. The Fred chance was an interesting one as well. Nick Pope has been absolutely brilliant. Last few weeks, he's showing a little bit of that kind of rash kind of nature, and there's one or two incidents creeping into his game. We saw it in the last home game where he raced out and he won the header this time. This time he races out. He's beaten to the ball. The ball goes across the box, and Fred thankfully puts it over. Newcastle very fortunate in that instance.
Yeah, I think they were. I think, Pope had quite an assured game yesterday. I think he was good not to sort of make a rash challenge on Rashford. I sort of had images in my head that he was going to try and take him down in the penalty area. And initially watching that, I thought Rashford should probably have taken it himself rather than squaring it. I mean, I've watched the game back on Match Today, and I think the angle probably was too tight. Really good defending from Newcastle to try and sort of put Fred off, but they really, really rode their luck in the last couple of minutes. And I think, actually, if Manchester United had left Ronaldo on instead of Rashford, I think that header in the 95th minute actually goes in. So I think Newcastle have been done a favour in that sense.
Yeah, well, we're not complaining.
Yeah, exactly.
Not complaining at all. And I think it could be a really valuable point as well when you are having to really, really defend hard in the last few minutes. And, as soon as that whistle goes, you're down on your knees, you're proper out of breath, your chest is hurting because you ran so much. It's those moments when you manage to secure a point that really, in many ways, can boost your season more sometimes than a win where you've dominated in many instances, I think, because and it's the same as well. If Man United had won that game, I think after defending so well, the impact on a squad and a team, your manager has to get that spot on in the days after. So to get a point, in such hard-working fashion, I think will be so valuable.
Yeah, 100%. And look, Manchester United might not be sort of their former selves and, their former glory, but going to Old Trafford and playing like that and getting a point is always a good result. I think the fans were quite, happy with it. And I think, as you touched on there, it's just about building consistency. Be so interesting if that 98th minute goal at Liverpool hand went in, because, I mean, what a start of the season that would have been. It's already been a fantastic start, but as I touched on earlier in the show, Newcastle are just proven really, really tricky to beat home and away. And you think, Spurs is going to be a big test on Sunday going down to London against a team who are really, really in form. But how's team just, keep finding a way to get points?
Simon here says if Pope didn't come out to Rashford, he would have been one-on-one with Pope, pushing him wide, and then the comments disappeared. But basically, he was telling me, I think that I don't really know what I'm talking about when it comes to goalkeeping. He was saying Pope was doing a good job. It's on the screen there. You mentioned there Spurs are in good form. I think that's what they've won the last 8 at home. But equally, let's not forget Newcastle are in good form as well, and there's no reason why Newcastle can't finish this week with 7 points. I mean, can they get 2 wins out of the next 2 games? I don't see why not.
I think you're definitely looking at Wednesday's game and thinking, it's a big opportunity to get 3 points. Everton's away form this season. They're really struggling on the roads. I think Tottenham, as I've said, provides a bit of a trickier task. But look, in seasons gone by, you'd be writing it off already now. I mean, you're saying now that it's nailed on that we're going to win. And I'm saying...
I said,
I'm saying,
nailed on. That's an interest. Hey.
I'm saying, look, I think if we can go there and put in a performance like yesterday and get a point, it'll be fantastic. I'm not sure whether we can go and win, but look, this is Eddie Howe's Newcastle United, and anything's possible.
Darren Bailey here asks an interesting point. He says, it will be interesting to see if we rotate heavily against Everton. Can Callum Wilson handle 3 games in a week? And that, Aaron, is probably the biggest question, I would say, heading into Wednesday's game.
Yeah, Chris Wood came on yesterday, for the last sort of remainder of the game, tried his best to put the pressure on from the front, but, he didn't have too much to do. But I think Darren's right with that comment. I think we've got to wrap him up in cotton wool, Callum Wilson, that is. And I think I wouldn't be surprised to see Chris Wood come in on Wednesday. equally, we know that Howe, doesn't like to change these teams, and he hasn't really got too many options in other positions to do so. So,
do you maybe start your strongest team against Everton? You're at home. Everton are obviously, not having the best of seasons, probably the weakest side, or more certainly the weaker side than Spurs. Do you think Eddie Howe looks at this and he thinks, well, obviously they're going to be tired, but we've got a better chance of getting 3 points here against Everton than maybe we have against Spurs? Or is he just a manager that every game 3 points and he will endeavour to play the best team that he can? And we're sitting here talking about changes when in reality he might end up, trying or getting as close to his strongest starting 11 that he can in both games.
I think that's probably more like it. I think, as you touched on there, every game for him is a winnable game, and he'll always set his team up to do so. We asked him about it yesterday, and we said, as the changes come in, you've got Everton, you've got Tottenham, you've got big games coming up in a short space of time, and he sort of said, well, I can't really change the team that much. He's suffering with Maxi and Isak being out. Shelby's back in the team, he's back in the squad, but he won't be back in the team for a couple of weeks, you'd think. How does he change the back? Does he bring the cells in like he did against Liverpool? I think if you ask me now, I think the changes I would probably make is I'd probably bring Target in. I'd like to see Anderson start down the left instead of Murphy. And then you'd think, and maybe Willett comes back in if he's recovered from his illness instead of Longstaff. So maybe 3 changes I would say, but not much more than that if you're asking me now ahead of Wednesday.
How big of a blow is it to potentially lose Isak maybe until we return, Premier League returns after the World Cup?
Yeah, massive. I mean, they've had rotten luck this season. Isak, Maxi, Wilson and Bruno never really all been fit at the same time. They've scored 9 goals in 2 games at Fulham and Brentford, but you think it's maybe, papering over the cracks a little bit. Yesterday, I thought second half they just looked toothless again. So, the need of, Miggy and Wilson are huge, because we know that Murphy and Fraser will come up with a goal every 4 or 5 games if you're lucky. But, it's a huge blow to still not have essentially, Maxi and Isak, 2 of your 3 biggest attacking threats for what looks like another couple of weeks.
And obviously you mentioned there St. Maximin. Just how was Eddie Howe when he was talking about the injuries to Isak and St. Maximin?
Very cautious, as he usually is. He said that Maxi suffered another setback, and it's sort of delayed his training in the last couple of weeks. It doesn't sound like Maxi's as bad as Isak. He pretty much said that Isak was a reoccurrence of the thigh injury that he picked up with Sweden, and it looks like Howe doesn't think that he'll be back before the World Cup. Maxi keeps being on the cusp of coming back and then picking up knocks. So Maxi maybe before December, but I think in terms of Isak, it's not looking good on that front.
It's a shame, because it'd be so interesting to see when everyone's fit what Eddie Howe would do. But it looks like we'll have to wait until the new year to potentially see all the star players fit. Then of course you risk, touch wood, it doesn't happen, but you would assume Bruno goes off to the World Cup, and you can just see it being Newcastle's luck that he picks up some injury. But fingers crossed, that's me just being a little bit pessimistic. We've got a comment there, Aaron, if you just scroll up slightly about prioritising Everton. Can you read it out for us, because I can't quite see it?
Yeah, Jonathan Casely says we have to prioritise Everton. They could park the bus, and we risk another Palace Bournemouth, fail to beat them, and it's been a bad week.
What do you make of that final sentence there? Fail to beat them, and it's been a bad week.
Look, it's a big chance to get another 3 points on the board. Look, if they get beaten, and then they go to Tottenham and take a few points, or a point or 3 off them, I don't think it's been a bad week. I think it'll be an opportunity missed. But I don't think it would be anything to worry about if they don't pick up 3 points on Wednesday.
I mean, is there a case that this point against Manchester United maybe is only a good point if you do, though, pick up at least, you have to at least pick up 1 win over the next 2 games?
Yeah, definitely. I think if they lose or they fail to beat Tottenham and Everton, I think you're looking at that first half against Manchester United thinking that was a really, really good opportunity missed. On another day, Newcastle go into half time ahead. Would Manchester United be able to get into it? We'll never know. But if they can keep building on this like they had, as I've said, they're very, very hard to break down now. And I think the fact that we're even saying that they're going to go to Tottenham, who are second in the league, and 8 on the spin at home, and we're not actually too worried, shows the run of form that this team's on. So it's imperative that they back it up. But I think going into Wednesday, you've got to be confident after what we've seen in the last couple of games.
I've got a couple of questions about the January window, so we'll answer them. There was one comment, I do apologise, I can't see it again, but I know you were asking us who we'd like to sign in January, and I think you tipped the person who wrote it there for me, Madison. Who would you? I mean, I agree. Sorry, again, I can't see the name because of the way the comments are on the screen.
Stephen Hinton has asked.
There we go, Steve. Thank you for the thank you for the comments. I mean, I agree with Steve there, Aaron. I think James Madison would be the ideal signing for me in January. He's not going to be cheap, but you buy, if you want quality, you have to spend the money.
Yeah, look, I mean, we've tried to draw a lot of support from on this podcast in recent weeks. We're trying to hope that he's listening out there so that he knows that we want him. But yeah, look, he's been fantastic for Leicester. He's really, really had a good start of the season. Everyone's talking about that England call potentially being on the horizon. And I think, yeah, look, he'd be a fantastic signing if they can prize him away from Leicester. I would also like to see maybe more of a wide player than a 10. I think, given how Maxey's injuries have been this season, given that Murphy just isn't up to the level, I think I would like to see them buy sort of an out-and-out winger, which Maddison probably isn't. So maybe if they can tempt Moussa Diaby away from Leverkusen, that would be my ideal signing. They're having a very bad season in Germany, so you feel like they may have a better chance of signing him in January than they did in the summer.
Another comment was asking Aaron whether these injuries to key players like Isak, like St. Maximin, do you think that has a bearing on the plan for January, or do you think that the plan for January will be as it was, regardless of the diagnosis on Isak and St. Maximin?
I think they'll be looking, towards January with this in mind, knowing that they've got a group of forwards who are quite injury prone. We know Wilson needs to be wrapped up. Maxey, although he does manage to give you 25, 30 games a season, he obviously hasn't. He doesn't look like he's going to be able to do that this season. So look, of course, it's going to play a factor on that January business. We saw in the summer that yes, they wanted a striker, but we saw with Wilson's injury how quick they actually went out and bought Isak when actually previously they'd been put off by the price tag. So there's nothing to say that touch wood this doesn't happen, but a big player like Trippier goes out and gets injured in November, December at the World Cup, and all of a sudden that changes their plans for January in terms of getting a right back in. So I think if you're looking at it now, they'll be looking at those two positions, sort of a number 10 like Maddison and a wide player, just to give them that little more killer instinct in front of goal that they've been lacking in the last sort of 3 out of the 4 games.
Yeah, they're very proactive, which is good.
Yeah.
I do think, though, we mentioned this in the summer as well, that even with Isak coming in, they needed another striker. It's someone who's similar to the way Wilson plays, so he can fit into that system. And I think when Wilson goes off, we're seeing the same old thing. It doesn't suit Wood. He's not going to give you what Wilson does. And I think they do need to go out and be someone younger. Of course, it will be, because you're probably not going to get a big name coming in and accepting that he might be third choice for everyone fit. So, but for me, yes, I'd like to see Maddison, but I do think another striker just to come in and offer the same thing Wilson does is so important, because they haven't really got any game changers at the moment on the bench with these injuries. I think that's something that's shone through.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's why they made the point of going for the likes of João Pedro and Ekitike in summer, because really, if you're looking at a third choice striker behind Isak and Wilson, you'd like someone, young, fresh, up and coming, who maybe isn't going to mind playing third fiddle behind those two strikers. So we know that the club are being very active in terms of the young players that they're signing. We know that obviously a lot of them are going straight into the under-21s or the reserves of the academy, but it wouldn't surprise me if they maybe try to offload Chris Wood in January and actually replace him with, a 19, 20, 21-year-old striker who can offer a little bit more in front of goal.
Roger Cook says he'd 100% take a striker. So good to see Roger agrees with me. Aaron, just sum up then your take on what happened at Old Trafford and the, I suppose I assume positive impact it'll hopefully bring to Newcastle in what is a very crucial week.
Yeah, look, I think a very good front foot attacking performance in the first half, and then on the flip side, quite a resilient defensive performance in the second half. Very lucky, as I've said, to come away with a point, given how the last 10-15 minutes played out. But the fact that Newcastle have actually gone to Old Trafford, being the better team for 45 minutes and taking a point away, I think is a very, very positive result. And I think, as we've talked on the last 5 minutes, the challenge now is just making sure they continue doing this against Everton and Tottenham, and making sure that in this big cluster of games they've got before the World Cup, they go into this winter break, still trying to be around that top 6 area.
Fingers crossed. We'll bring you all the build-up, Eddie Howe's press conference as well ahead of the game against Everton on Wednesday. If you head over to chroniclelive.co.uk, you can see all the reaction to Sunday's game against Manchester United, and that's where that build-up will be. This has been the Everything is Black and White podcast with myself, Andrew Musgrove, and our Newcastle United editor, Aaron Stokes. Please remember to like and follow the podcast through your podcast provider and give us a subscription on YouTube as well. Thank you very much for joining us and enjoy the rest of your week.